Okay, I'm going to vote that we start because it's 10 a.m. and there are people here already. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to leave that poll live just for now. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, How to Structure Your Transformation. We haven't met everybody that signed up for this webinar, so I'll just do a quick who we are. So I'm Rhiannon Gibbs from Esse. I'm one of the two directors, and my colleague here, Gurdeep, but known as G, right, yep, is the other one. And at Esse, we are improvement consultants, let's say. We work with organisations that have a social purpose to transform and improve the services that they deliver. We don't call it change. We don't often call it transformation. It has to be improvement led, because not all change and transformation always leads to improvement, but the type we do does. Everybody at Esse comes from the sectors that we work in. So I have a background in criminal justice. G has background in housing. We have consultants with backgrounds in housing and charities and local authorities. And we understand and appreciate that change and transformation and improvement is very much about culture of an organisation rather than just being about the tools that you deploy. And if I can move into the only salesy bit, this is our show-off slide, if you like. And we've got experience of working with very many organisations since we were founded in 2004. And some of you might even recognise organisations you've worked in that little display. Fundamentally, we do three things, from the micro, we would say, to improving services. And certainly the thing we probably get asked for the most is service reviews, improving services, whether that is things like revs and bends in local authorities, whether it is repairs or voids in housing, whether that is events in charities, whether it is discharges in hospitals. That service improvement. And then we move on to some of the more transformational things where actually we have to develop people and cultures alongside improving services. And then there's also this element of making sure that your organisation is designed correctly from the top down to ensure your best chances of success. And today we'll talk about all of these three things as we go forwards. So hopefully you're here because you want to know what the stages are to go through in order to deliver a successful transformation. And we're quite clear that transformation and change are different things. And I really like that bottom quote, and I must find out who to attribute it to. But all transformation involves change, but not all change is transformational. We are literally talking about taking one organisation and changing it into something completely different to be a transformation. So we're quite clear that there is a distinction here. And today we're not talking about change management, we are talking about organisational transformation. And before we launch into those steps, we want to talk about some underpinning principles. So some things that all successful transformation need. So regardless of the steps that you go through, there are these four things that all transformations require. And that is that pressure for change, that clear shared vision, capacity and capability, and actionable first steps. And I'm sure I don't need to explain these in a lot more detail, but the pressure for change is the why you do something, sometimes called the drivers. It's your burning bridge. And the best example I can give you, having lived what we've been through for the past 18 months, is COVID. We've all seen transformation happening in all sectors as a result of COVID. The way we order in restaurants isn't the same. The way we access health services isn't the same. It's completely different. And in many cases, so much better than it was before. But that is an example of a real pressure for change. COVID certainly made things happen. And there does have to be a significant pressure. I remember talking to a local authority it must have been a couple of years ago now, and they were saying that they had significant cost pressures, but staff just weren't feeling those pressures. So when it came to, does that lead to a successful transformation? Yes, those at the top of the organisation felt it, but those that were actually delivering day to day weren't feeling that impact. So it wasn't creating that momentum, that pressure for change that is required to make it successful. You have to be able to translate that into a burning bridge for everybody in the organisation so they get on board. We then have that clear and shared vision. Where are you going to? I'm sorry, I completely missed something at the start. G is going to monitor the chat and the questions board. So if you have any questions or comments, or you want to speak or anything through this, G will respond to you or interrupt me. Yeah, thanks, G. As we go through, completely forget these sorts of things. Okay, sorry, back to the transformation. So yeah, where you're going, what your story will be, but most importantly, what will it look and feel like? So if you're talking about a vision, how far ahead are you looking? For one, is this your 5-year vision, your 10-year vision? Is it your 20-year vision? And then, you know, what does that look and feel like? You need to make it real for everybody in the organization. Moving on then to capacity and capability. Do you have capacity? Do your people have the time to make the changes, to deliver what needs delivering through your transformation? Do you have the expertise to make it happen? And every organization we speak to is incredibly busy at the moment. And the first conversations are around how can you create that capacity for change? And we do have a tool, well, an approach in here to help with that. But it's absolutely critical that it just doesn't become another layered activity on top of a very busy day to day. And then lastly, the actionable first steps. So that's the practical side of things. So what are you doing first? It also includes getting some quick wins, because we find that one of the things that helps people buy in most to their transformation programs is those quick early wins that show them that the approach you're taking will have real benefit for them. Yeah, and that generates momentum, it generates excitement. That means you're more likely to succeed. And just to be clear, the impact of getting this wrong, if you don't have that pressure for change, you get that lack of urgency. You know, it can wait. I don't need to attend that workshop. What I'm doing now is more important. So you get this sort of apathy about your change, really. If you don't have a clear and shared vision, then you get low engagement. People don't understand, you know, why it's necessary to do what you need to do. They don't understand where you're going. So the engagement tends to be very low. If we don't have that capacity, you get huge frustration. People that know why they need to be involved and want to be involved, but they are frustrated because they don't have the time to give. Or the other outcome from that, of course, is burnout, because people just feel that they are working so hard and they try and do this as an extra. And then we get burnout of our people and people leave. And then actionable first steps. If we don't have that, we get a lot of false starts, we get that loss of momentum, and things tend to sort of fizzle out and I don't want to say die, but die. Okay, so those 4 things really need to underpin the transformation you're going on. And as you'll have seen through all of those, that means good communication. So good communication is essential to make sure people know what the first steps are reassured you have capacity and capability to understand what that clear vision is and to understand your drivers. Okay. See, G's got a handle on the Q&A. So those stages for the successful transformation, really the reason you joined us today. So this is relevant for, as it says, a significant transformation or a shift in your organization. It's not the same as a model for change, because we start with the very top of the organization, engaging that leadership and agreeing where it is that you're going to. We call it the destination state. Some people might talk about a target operating model. But let's look at some of those examples of drivers for transformations at the moment. It might be that organizations want to embed a culture of continuous improvement. And we're seeing that more and more. People saying that we are already really good at what we do, but we want to stay leaders in our sector. And therefore, we want to harbour a culture of continuous improvement. We get organizations that say, actually, we're not the top of our game, but we want to get better and better and better and better. And we recognize that comes from continuous improvement. And that's why they embark on this journey of continuous improvement. It might be that you are changing your vision, you know, actually what you want to become as an organization, the impact you want to have changes. And therefore you need to go through this realignment. It might be that you're changing your mission or your purpose. So what are you actually going to do day to day? What do you want to be delivering? And then you might be changing how people work. There's a lot of operating model changes at the moment, a lot of talk about hybrid work, a lot of head offices closing. So this might be the where people work, it might be the how people work, it could be the technology that they use. And yes, you might have structural changes either as a result of, or in addition to, or instead of all of those things as well. So there's lots of drivers at the moment for transformation, which is why we thought this session was particularly well timed, because these are the queries that we're getting. And here's the 5 steps that we'll be walking through with you today. Now, you'll notice this diagram has no end, because we believe that once you enter stage 5, you stay there. So you are a continuously improving organization until one of those other things happens again, until you need another significant shift or a transformation, and then you need to go around this cycle again. So we stay in stage 5, you stay a continuously improving organization, getting better and better, aligned with that vision until that needs revision, and round you go again. So quick overview before we go into the detail of it. But number 1 is always going to be engage your leadership. The only transformation programs we've ever been in that have really failed have been because of a lack of buy-in and commitment at that executive level. G, is that fair? Yeah. So that's absolutely, that's your prerequisite. That is the most important thing before you go any further. Then it's about agreeing your vision with a time frame for that, and your destination state. So actually, what do you want to look like in that time frame? And some people refer to a target operating model, but destination state, sort of the same thing. We then move on to conducting a gap analysis and a diagnostic. So fundamentally, what are we like now as an organization, and how far away from what we want to be are we? We then align those things. So we say, to get from where we are now to where we want to be, we need to do these things, and we put that onto a master schedule. And then the reason it's the biggest chunk is because it really is quite significant. You have to put that plan into action. You have to implement, embed, and sustain, and continuously improve everything that you've put in place. Okay. And just a note here to say that even if you think you're happy with your target operating model, or that your leadership is engaged, it's definitely worth doing just a recap. We can be talking about literally one workshop or one conversation just to reaffirm those things. We've had people that have started their transformations partway through, only to realize that actually they weren't quite agreed on their destination state, or there was a bit of leadership, lack of buy-in, which has really derailed things later. So even if you think those things are nailed, it is just worth reconfirming them. Okay. G will jump in if I forget anything. So we move on to the detail of the stages. So let's talk about the stage 1, engaging leadership. And it's just a few points here, really. It's the entire senior leadership. They have to be engaged. They have to be clear about what it is they're committing to. They don't have to agree on their vision yet. That's a really important point. People think that, in order to get started, you have to be agreed on the vision. Well, that happens in stage 2. But the bold bit at the bottom, what they have to absolutely be in agreement in is why you are doing this transformation and what those drivers are. Because if they're not agreed on those, then you're not going to get off the starting blocks. And sometimes that's about making them feel the pain. There are all sorts of things you can do to successfully engage the leadership. I'm not saying that you have to pitch up to a meeting and say, do you all agree? Yes. You can take them out to see how things are operating within the business. Go and see is an incredibly powerful tool for getting people to understand drivers for transformation. So there are all sorts of activities you can do if that buy-in is lacking to try and generate it, but you can't move on without that leadership buy-in to the drivers for your transformation, and ultimately that why they're doing it.
Yeah, I'd probably just add that there's an element of I call sort of leveling up, bringing everyone and to have a common understanding of what those drivers might be. Sometimes, particularly when you get into the sort of move away from exec teams and into the senior leadership, they can be quite focused on their area and the issues and the drivers they have in their area. There is an element of trying to get them to understand, sort of the wider issues and how some of their issues in their areas do translate across the rest of an organization. But as Rhiannon said, it doesn't have to be completely agreed on, common. That vision doesn't have to be shared at that stage, but as long as you have some understanding of what else is happening, it's very helpful at this stage.
Thanks, Jane. Perfect. So our leadership is engaged. We move on to designing that destination state and agreeing the vision. And these are the stages that you move through, and like a book, you move through it left to right. And I suppose what we're trying to do here is create a critical path for how you design that destination state. It happens less now than it used to, but what we would find is that some people would start with their technology in particular, or would start with where they want to be working, rather than starting with their sort of vision, why they exist, what they want to achieve, then looking at the strategy, how they do that, then looking at processes, the data and the analytics, and then looking at the capability. And capability includes the technology. It probably should be more prominent on there, given the role technology plays today. But it's very much a sort of a sequence. Start with our business objectives and why do we exist and what do we want to achieve. And you must have a timeline for this as well, because what you don't want are people talking at different levels. So you could have your chief exec talking about a 3-year vision and what you want to achieve in that time, and you might have people that are thinking sort of 10, 15 years. So you have to be absolutely explicit up front about what that time frame is. But we answer these sort of questions in this sequence, starting with those business objectives, moving into your strategy, then looking at your processes, information analytics, and we have a technique called process hierarchy, which is about building identifying the processes that a business needs in order to deliver its strategy and its vision. Rather than looking at the processes you have now, this basically says, if these are the things that you want to achieve, actually, what processes do you need in place to be able to deliver it? And what's interesting when doing that exercise is there's quite often processes that you might do now that aren't actually required in order to deliver your strategy. And then there might be processes that are needed and you don't have. So it's an important exercise to do, is to build that process model regardless of what you have now. So based around where you're going, rather than this is what we have now, let's tweak it. Actually do that blank piece of paper exercise, do your process hierarchy and identify what you need in place in order to be able to deliver your strategy and your vision. And another thing you can do once you've got that in place is you can, sort of RAG rate the processes that you've got to identify those that either need building, need dismantling, or need improvement if they are, not delivering the things that you need. And then coupled with process obviously goes data and information, identifying what data flows you need and what information you need to understand your customers, but also your performance within the organization. And again, don't start with what you've got, start with what you need, because you might need to build those data flows from scratch rather than, coping with the things that you have now. And once you understand that, then we can start looking at capability. So those are the things that support the delivery of that. So the technology, what systems do you need, whether it's to produce the data or to run the workflows or to create automation. You'll have a better idea of that having done the process information analytics piece. And of course, the other part of capability is our people. So you're looking at, do you have the continuous improvement and transformation expertise in-house? But you're also looking at the skills, the resources, and as it says earlier, the culture to deliver the service that you've been designing so far. And then lastly, onto location, which of course is a hot topic at the moment. Do you need physical offices? How could you work virtually if that's the route you want to go down? Do you have some sort of hybrid approach? Do you do, breakout workshop type venues? Do you hire them? There's all those questions around location, all of which are a lot more dominant in the workplace now than they were 18 months ago, when I think people were talking more about, half working from home or working from home on request. I think that default has now been switched somewhat. And we've been talking to organizations where they've gone as far as shutting their offices and developing completely new models. but after they've considered those other things first.
Yeah, I think that's the important point, is it, Rhiannon? I think you were being kind when you said most people don't start with the back end of these stages. I think more recently we have had people saying that they want to shut down an office, or they want everyone working from home, and have gone sort of that way round rather than thinking about what they need to deliver. So I think I'm sure we've got some people on today that are fans of Simon Sinek, and the idea of starting with why. And this isn't that dissimilar. It is about the vision, thinking about what outcomes and what impact are we trying to have as an organization, or as a team, in fact, because this target operating model and destination state can work for a department, a team, as well as it can an organization. But what outcome do we want to have? And then starting to think about what we need to do and how we're going to do it. And this breaks up in a very similar way. Those business objectives are very much about the why before we start thinking about what it is we do, and then how we do that. So those conversations around location, capability, and processes all should be feeding off the why. And thankfully, we're working with some organisations that have done that really well, and saying what is it we need to do, and why do we have to do it, and then starting to think about what's the best way that we can do that. And whether you want to steer to a particular way of working, that's okay, but sort of just starting with we just want to do it this way without sort of any concept as to why can be quite dangerous and ultimately detrimental to any transformation that you get. So really key.
Perfect. Okay, so now you know where you're going, what your destination state is, your target operating model, if you like. We then need to do that gap analysis. So we have to understand how the organization is operating now, and what is the gap from where we want to be, from where we are now. And we do that through, we call it a diagnostic, gap analysis, whatever you like. But when we look at it, it contains all of these elements. Now, don't be put off by the big diagram. The dark blue bits really tell you what it is at a top level that you're looking for. And the reason for highlighting this is because depending on your drivers, you might be tempted to hone in on just one of these elements. But as we've said, because you're designing a holistic target state, not just looking at, your location, therefore you need to look more at, culture, or you're changing your structure. So you're going to look at, the people you've got in place and the processes. You need to look at the whole. And hopefully you have a lot of information in your organization that starts to pull this together. Any gaps will need to be gathered, and there are all sorts of tools and techniques you can use to gather this information. But fundamentally, you're looking at that vision and strategy. So hopefully you've done a lot of work on leadership buy-in already. It's worth looking at policy deployment. So by that, if the organization makes a top level decision, or a strategic direction, how well is that understood on the front line? And we sometimes do an exercise where we take a piece of policy that's been cascaded from the top, and we go to frontline people and we say, are you aware of this? Did you know this? Can you tell us a bit about this? And quite often the answer is no, which points to a problem with that communication, that cascade of policy across an organization. And clearly, if you're embarking on a transformation, that's something that needs to be addressed, because otherwise you're going to get a lot of those problems I talked about in the first few slides. And then, of course, the alignment of your transformation to your strategy, which should be fine because you have designed it. So. And then we move on to things like the customer and stakeholders. How do they feel about the service that you're operating now? So your customers, the people within your organization, and those other stakeholders. Before moving on to things like process and technology, which is where people are classically more comfortable. So how well do our processes run? What is the capacity of our processes? What's the capability of them? What systems do we have? How well are they used, which is quite critical. One of the knee-jerk reactions we sometimes find in organizations is that people say, oh, well, the system doesn't work, it's rubbish. But then we find that people aren't using it as intended. And of course, if you bring in a new system, whether it's working, the old one's working or not, if people are used to not using it, and the culture is that, you know, you bypass systems. There's no reason to think that they'll start using a new system. It's the same with processes. We think we have a process, people aren't using it, we'll design a new process. Well, you don't have a culture where people follow the things that are in place. So you've got to crack that first before we start bringing in new things. So you can tell a lot from that middle strand there. For assessing people and the capabilities, so the culture of accountability, whether people are ready for the change. And one thing we hear a lot is change fatigue, because people have been through change again and again. And one piece of advice we've been given more and more to organisations is try not to badge this up as a massive programme or project. You know, transformation isn't a project, as we say. We see it as a continuous, embedding a continuous improvement culture once you're over those first few activities. If people feel it's been launched with a big bang, it puts pressure on them. They start worrying about their jobs and what's coming. Whereas if it just becomes, you know, it's an adjustment, I'm going to use the word that I really hate now, a pivot for the organisation, you know, to allow them to do what they do now better, you'll get less anxiety from those within the organisation. And then, of course, looking at data measurement, data and measurement, so whether that's measurement in terms of key performance indicators, or how well people use data, or how well those data flows work. Do we have to do a lot of data extraction and manipulation, or can we extract data straight from our source systems is quite important to understand. And all the time we're doing this, you're looking for quick wins. So actually, what are the quick improvements that we can have within the organisation? Because that helps generate buy-in and enthusiasm. We're looking for what are the things that we would prioritise to move from where we are now to our destination state. And we're looking for what are the benefits of doing that. The organisation will have been quite clear about their drivers. And I think one of the things that you often need to keep in the forefront of your mind is what are the benefits of doing this. And I've now realized that I've forgotten to do something else, but I'll come back to it in a second. And all of that leads into step 3. So I put this poll up. I'm just going to end that one. That's interesting. Okay, so lots of people for personal development. That's fantastic. We very much approve. Few organizations are in the early stages or thinking about transformations, and a number of people are encountering issues in a transformation program. That's really interesting. Thank you for participating in that. I'm just going to launch one more poll while I'm talking, which is about the biggest issues you've encountered in transformation. Again, it's helpful information. If you've gone through any sort of transformation in an organization you're in now, or in an organization you've been in previously, you might have found some issues in it. If you haven't, great, don't answer the question. But you know, even in our experience of doing transformation, there are always issues that crop up that need addressing along the way. Okay. G's thinking, how could you forget to do that? I know.
I forgot to tell you, so it's fine.
That's okay. Excellent. I'm going to assume there's no questions at this point because I can't see any, and I'm just going to continue. So a master schedule. I don't know how many of you have seen a master schedule before. It's one of these, it is a tool. And when we launch in organizations, there's often like a light bulb moment with people, and it's great to see. Developing it in the first place can be fairly challenging. It's quite resource intensive, but it saves so much time, effort, and pain later on. So all change and transformation will have plans attached to it. And in your organization, you might have dozens of different project plans and activity plans. And I suppose the question I would pose at this point is, how many of you have got one single view of all the significant activity happening in your organization at any one time? Because the problem with all the different change and transformation activity in any organization is the resource it draws on, in addition to business as usual, which can create frustration, as we saw from that 4-box model early on. So a master schedule is a way of plotting all of your significant change and transformation activity against all the significant business as usual activity happening in the organization. Now, historically, this would have been done on brown paper and post-it notes, and then translated into a nice big printed thing that we could put up on the wall. Now they tend to be a lot more digital, and we've seen some very clever ways of doing that, from very low tech, as you can see here, with spreadsheets and lines, but actually it's easy to adjust and it works well to certain systems that people are using. A few key points about a master schedule. So having done your diagnostic, you now understand what it is you need to do to get from where you are now to your destination state. Okay, that is the outcome of the diagnostic. So the master schedule now is saying, if we have to do all of these things, and it's not a short list, it'll be a long list of activity spanning years to complete. You'll have an idea of priority for them as well. But, a significant list of things you have to do. What you now need to do is identify the critical path and plot them onto a schedule, so you can ensure that the activities line up and you're not doing too much at once, and also that you are considering business as usual and other change activities which are undoubtedly happening in the organization at the same time. So on this plan, you put all of those activities, you put all the significant business as usual activities. And the classic example we always come back to is, if you're doing any sort of change or transformation that requires input from finance, trying to do that with them in March is not recommended, because they're going to be busy. They're going to be busy with end of year and setting up the new year. So there are always times that don't suit other teams, but it's amazing how often those teams are drawn on at the worst possible time for them, or how often IT is asked to be involved in a project when they're in the middle of an office move, because nobody considers the significant amount of work there is for IT in a time like that, or at the point where they are changing major systems. If you don't have visibility of all those things that are happening, how can you effectively schedule your transformation activity? So that's what a master schedule does. A master schedule is a high-level plan that shows all the major change and transformation activity alongside your business as usual pinch points for the organization.
Yeah, it's worth saying it's visibility through collaboration. So it's getting people involved and the right departments involved. It's interesting, on the poll, lack of resources to deliver has come up top trumps as probably as we expected, Rhiannon. I think and this is a test to that. It's often because those business as usual activities aren't included when we're looking at doing transformation. There's this assumption that we can just pick up extra work, and a lot of extra work. Everything's a project these days, and I think this goes back to understanding what are the key things to do, understanding that this is a journey that's going to be over 5 years, really prioritizing and phasing the activity, and then the sort of aligning it and or the alignment of it and the resourcing of it comes through something like the master schedule. And also, the other thing to think about here is the approach to delivery that we're going to take. So there's a few different ways you might want to do things. It might be a hybrid. So people talk about waterfall or agile. At this level, less of an issue, because we're talking about delivering big pieces of work outcomes. But as you get closer and closer to the front line and have more detailed plans that sort of link up to this corporate plan, then that's when you start thinking, what do we have to deliver to be in a position for this not to be a priority anymore? Are we in a position where something else takes over because we've not been able to improve it? So I think traditionally these have been relatively static plans over the course of a 6-month period. While that might be the case at a corporate level, I think what you'll find is that particularly if you adopt agile, sort of more flexible types of project delivery, then at a frontline you'll find that the prioritization and the sort of rephasing of work can change quite a lot, which again, it can have quite a big impact on the resources available. So there's a lot of I think we talk a lot about implementation and not too much planning, but this is about setting up the transformation to be successful, and that's why it's so important. The diagnostic showing you what needs to happen, and this is very much about how we're going to make it happen. So
you're right, and phasing is the critical word, isn't it? And setting one of these up is very much an exercise in negotiation, might be a good way to phrase it, because you need all of those senior leaders, the exec team at the very least, in a room together. And what you are doing is you are scheduling and prioritizing all the activity in an organization. And I can guarantee everybody wants their priorities done now. They want them delivered and delivered quickly. But resources, what the master schedule does is it makes it very clear when things are happening. And you'll find initially when people put up, we often get people to put the post-it notes up or to put the activity to schedule it as they want it. And what you find is that everything's in the first 6 months, and everything starts and finishes around April and September, because that's the start of year and half year mark. And it just can't work that way. And you'll find that 6 months worth of activity spans out into about 2 years. So what you'd planned to do without a master schedule in 6 months is really going to take you 2 years to deliver properly. But it was never going to deliver in 6 months. It was always going to take more than 2 years, because it wouldn't have been scheduled effectively and it wouldn't then tie up properly. And a good master schedule will also aid decision making. So it might be that a system starts falling over and you have to make a very difficult decision about whether you keep it going for a bit longer, extend a contract, move on to spreadsheets in the interim, or whether you want to replace it wholesale. And if you can see activity coming up to, roll out full dynamics or to transfer your systems to a new one, then it can help you make those decisions about whether it's better to replace now or to limp on a bit longer. So master schedules are really effective, and they are layered through an organization. So once you have agreement at executive level, that's the master schedule, if you like. That shows everything that's happening at that top level. What you then create are directorate schedules that shows just the impact of all of those things and more detailed milestones at a directorate level. So if there's something happening that's not going to touch, let's say, the finance directorate in any way, shape or form, it doesn't appear on their schedule. However, if it is going to impact them or need their involvement, it does need to be on there. But then they might put some things that are only impacting their directorate and not other directorates. And again, then you can cascade it down to sort of, service and team level as well under that. And the level of detail increases with every iteration downwards. And the relevant information remains and the irrelevant information filters off.
And we're very pragmatic people when it comes to this type of activity, and you understand that transformation is an investment, not only in terms of money but in terms of time. So we won't sit here and lie to you and say that everything's going to be rosy. I think what the thing about a master schedule and doing it this way does also start to get people, get certainly senior people to understand the impact that this type of work will have on performance. Now, it's not always going to drop. If you work it well, then it won't drop. And if you're bringing in additional resource, that can obviously help keep normal service levels. But seeing that work's happening in a certain area and the amount of resource that's going to be required to deliver that transformational work can start offsetting some of the conversations that you might say around service delivery having to take a hit for a small period. I mean, as I say, we try to mitigate that in a number of different ways, but at least that level of understanding is picked up at this stage.
Yeah, thanks, G. And if you want to know more about master schedules, a good first place to start would be if you go on our website, that's www.ad-esse.com. I'll send the link out afterwards, and you go on our knowledge hub. There is a sort of 2-pager on master schedules, so a little bit more about how you build them and what they are if you want to find out a little bit more. Okay, there's something in the Q&A.
I'll pick that up.
Pick that up, G. Thanks. Okay, so If we move on then to implementation, so we understand the gaps, we have a plan to address it, it's then about executing that plan. And these are all the areas that you will probably be working in that execution. We are going to be developing change capability. So you'll be developing in-house expertise, you'll be transferring skills to your staff, you'll be setting up some sort of change framework. That might be with a PMO, you might have a different approach in place. You've got to make sure your people strategy aligns with your CI culture. And by that, I mean, we've worked in organizations where we've talked about continuous improvement and the use of visual management and the necessity to have daily meetings at operational level. But none of that is included in the organization's diagnostic. None of it is included in one-to-ones. None of it is included in recruitment. There is no alignment of, behaviors with values in the organization. And that's what I mean. If you're committing to a continuous improvement culture, or if you're developing a new culture, through your transformation, you have to make sure that people strategy and your improvement strategy align. We also have to look at the leadership. So anybody in a leadership role, to make sure they are role modeling those expected behaviors, to make sure they are auditing your processes, to make sure they are as you expect them to be, and to make sure they are, we talk about the 5 guiding principles, which is about role modeling and going and seeing what is happening, but doing all of those leadership things that we would expect. And then we have adopting effective performance management, which largely involves looking at KPIs, making sure we're removing targets and putting decent measurement in place, making sure people are reviewing their performance regularly and problem solving and improving it. When we talk about value streams, we mean end-to-end processes that deliver that value for the customers. And we're continuing to improve those even after we might have made some step change. We are continuing to improve those and the systems in parallel. And then the last bit is about embedding, continuous improvement capability, because you don't just want to make that step change and then stagnate. There is always going to be about, continuously improving in an organization, which includes problem solving, developing your process standards and evolving them. And we talk a lot about, visual management in the workplace as well. Whether you have a physical workplace or not, visual management is still very relevant, even more so sometimes in an IT world. And just to say a little bit more about one of these things. So we get questioned a lot about, developing in-house change management capabilities. And we believe that any program, needs to involve a transfer of skills from, if you have people supporting, if you have skills in-house already, fantastic. Sometimes you need support from people like us to transfer that skill in-house. And it's something we're very passionate about. And that's because you don't want to be hiring consultants forever. You want to keep the costs down. And as we've said, a few times through this presentation, transformation is a process, not a project. So it's not something that starts and ends, it goes on. So you will always need that expertise, and developing in-house capabilities is the best way to do that. And we talk about 2 different roles. Often we talk about full-time practitioners. So these might be full-time, change managers, continuous improvement managers, but their job is to support this sort of activity within the organization and transfer skills to the workforce as well. And we then talk about part-time champions. So they are like practitioners, but they do a day job as well. So their focus is probably more within their business area and supporting their business areas with this sort of activity. But they do have a day job as well, so they can't commit full-time to this sort of activity. And if you're looking at transformation, as we say, capability is a critical success factor. You probably need one full-time person for each 150 or 200 members of your organization. Now, it's a sort of a rule of thumb that we've developed over the years, looking at what works and what doesn't. And within a full year, these people should be capable of running most of the activity that your transformation program will require. And if you did work with us, our practitioners and champions do get formally qualified. We're part of something called the Lean Competency System, which was developed with Cardiff University. It's an international qualification, and we've got numerous different levels for people to move through, which you get as a result of the activity anyway. and lifetime membership to our continuous improvement practitioners group, which meets weekly and we do additional training sessions with, a few of whom are on the session today. Hello. Okay, so I've left time for questions, but just to recap then, it's this model. The steps for successful transformation is moving through these 5 steps. It's applicable for transformation. It's different from change. This will involve change. So you need to adopt whatever change management approach you have in delivering this when we get particularly to stage 5. But this is about transformation. This is a significant shift in what you fundamentally do as an organization. And once you're clear on those drivers, and the leadership are clear on those drivers, you move around those 5 steps to understanding where it is you want to be, understand what the gaps are and what you need to do to get there, putting it onto that master schedule to make sure everything lines up and you're using resources effectively, and then delivering it. It makes it sound really easy. Everything we talk about, we say is simple, not easy, because it's simple principle to follow, but actually doing it because of the environments you work in, because of the complexities of the businesses you're in, is of course difficult. And don't forget those underpinning principles of making sure that there's a good understanding of your burning platform, your drivers, making sure that vision is clear, making sure that you've got the capacity and capabilities and that clear plan, which hopefully your master schedule gives you, in order to be able to get off those starting blocks. And all of that requires excellent communication. And we're big fans of storytelling. In fact, we even have a storytelling associate that works at Esse, because we find that a good message, well told, will increase your chances of success quite significantly. And the parting comments before I open up to questions is that we have a newsletter. If you go onto our website, there are places to sign up everywhere, and we're on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We even have a Pinterest board with models and diagrams on, which is fairly new for us, but we're on those platforms. And our next event is a practical session for how to design effective measures. It's something we've been asked to do a few times recently, and we've just delivered to the National Housing Federation HR and Learning and Development Group. It's a mouthful, on designing effective measures. So we thought, as there was such interest, we would bring it out into this space. So our next event, how to design effective measures, 45 minutes of sort of guidance, and then a chance to actually design them with a chance to bounce them off us as well while we're here. And that's on the 16th of August at 10 a.m. So that brings me to the end of the content. So very importantly, I need to ask whether today met your expectations, because if it didn't, I failed. Either failed to market this effectively or failed to deliver it effectively. And we will look to address that for future sessions. And are there any questions? I'll stop. There we go.
So we can tackle this one. It's Rhiannon. So how do you make sure that you keep your staff motivated through transformational change from start to end? And tips welcomed, of course. Do you want to pick that up, Rhiannon? Or?
Yeah, shall I start? We're definite believers in quick wins. So I know I mentioned it earlier, but no matter how small the win, making sure you get results early can make a big difference, or putting something in place that they will feel, something that will benefit them, can really help people motivated. The other element of this, of course, is engagement. Transformation is something that should be done with the workforce, whilst the vision and strategy is obviously developed by the top, involving staff in identifying the things that are going wrong now and the gap analysis, and then obviously in the delivery of improvement is a really good way to keep them engaged and motivated. I have to say, certainly with the transformations that we've been involved in, it's not staff that are the issue. As we say, the only transformations we've really experienced that have not gone quite to plan has been because of the leadership and the lack of communication largely. So yes, making sure you communicate well as well is a good way to keep people motivated, keep putting out those successes and do something that they will feel. G?
Yeah, I think the one I'd add, and it's sometimes forgotten, is having some form of framework that enables people to make change. So well, it's great when consultants are around. It's nice and easy to get people involved in, diagnostic, and get them involved in a lot of the change work as well. I think all of that's great, but when we're not there, when we're not running a session, we still want them to, we quickly talk about foundations and getting people to understand problem solving, understand measures, and getting them to make their own changes. So having that framework and that commitment from their managers and even senior staff to devolve that responsibility, that it's okay for you to make changes, is one of the biggest buy-ins I think we can see. We talk about information centers a lot. Some of you will have heard of that term before. But the bit that's successful about that is people quickly feel like they own and can do something about their own performance. So yeah, engagement in sort of projects and sort of service reviews, great. Quick wins, great. Communication, great. But actually that sort of framework, or that space for them to actually deliver change, is probably is the big one for me. So
brilliant. Hopefully that answered your question, Leanne. I can now see a question from Laura. I really like this question. I've come across this before. Interested to hear any tips from reverse engineering transformation from the bottom up if senior managers don't quite see the need for transformation, as on paper it looks like teams are performing fairly well. It's a great question. I suppose my take on it is that it will be fairly limited. The best way to address this particular issue is to try and get the leaders to see what the problems are, get them to feel the pain. You can do change improvement, let's say improvement on a sort of small proof of concept scale within your remit, and then show them how much better it could be. I'd say that's more sort of improvement. It'd be hard to know how you could literally transform a service without buy-in from those senior without buy-in from those senior managers. G, what do you think?
Yeah, it's not too dissimilar to Chris's question. The next one: can you start transformation at a small scale, or are you ultimately bound to leadership? And it's the same answer. I think if you were talking about, it depends on what you define transformation as. And for us, the reason we don't call ourselves transformation consultants unless we have to, generally go back to improvement, because it is moving from one thing to another thing is transformation. And for us, that thing should always be better than what was there before. Therefore, we call it improvement. So, I think for me, the answer is start as small as you can. Start as big as you can. If you're trying to get everyone involved, then you want to get leadership involved. But the way of doing that, and I think you called it, Laura, reverse engineering. So it's starting small, proof of concept. Hate to call them pilots, but you can call them experiments if you want. But as long as they are changing what was there before, and you're able to show that it's changed and show that it's improved, it's generally quite something that people pick up on and people buy into. So yeah, the answer is definitely yes. You can start as small as you have to. You just might call it something different.
And we've got a question from Clive about preferred change approach. Some of you know that we are experts in lean thinking. Fundamentally, we use lean thinking, agile thinking in particular to drive our transformation efforts. It's something we avoid in marketing because we find that people have a fairly limited knowledge often of what that really means, and people think it means snippy. Cut and just streamline, whereas of course it means so much more. And so therefore, we tend to use things like plan, do, check, act. As long as what happens, at the end of an improvement cycle is then put into best practice and then continuously improved, then that's the model that we use. G, do you have anything different on that?
Yeah, not so much. I think our model and the model that Rhiannon took you through are the stages that we tend to go through. Within that, I think we're fans of using whatever works best with a particular organisation. We are often asked to tailor our approach with whatever they want to use. And I think what I tend to find is it's usually some form of hybrid, or at different stages people want to use a particular change approach. But we're very principle based in lean, and the idea, the idea and the principle of what we want to achieve at the end of it through transformation goes back to the same thing. I don't think it's too much to add really to that. We're not tied to any particular model. The point is, if you are going to be, then just make that very clear to people, and find a really easy way, a simple way to communicate that to people.
I mean, DMAIC is another one that crops up, right, G, as a change
Yeah.
model. And it's, to be fair, we kind of view it the same as plan, do, check, act. We're kind of going through the same stages. They're named different things. The point is the same. You understand the problem and the root cause of the problem through careful definition and analysis. You identify, what you want to do, how you address the root causes of those problems, and then you implement a change. Check it's working, very important, because quite often we put something in place and we don't check it, and once it's working it becomes the way of working. But those models are...
we try, despite what people know and the use of models constantly, we try not to tie ourselves too much to them, because I think they can be quite restrictive. We constantly find ourselves using a multitude of them, and sort of hybrid versions of them, and things like that. So I think I always think of models as knowledge, and the more models the more knowledge you have, and the more options that you have to adapt to whatever's required there and then. So I can't say we've ever used a model from start to finish without there being something different coming up and having to be used at a particular point.
Real world application requires adaptation. And Chris, apologies, what is an information centre? Information centre is a visual management board. So there used to be sort of physical boards in the office. So they now tend to be much more virtual since COVID, but where you display purpose of a team, so their why, what they're there to achieve, and then you have performance information in relation to them. You have sort of long-term plans, so their local master schedule, their team schedule, and then you have KPIs. Did I say KPIs? KPIs, problem solving, and the long-term section. So basically a performance hub where the team are focused around improving what they do each and every single day and addressing problems that get in the way. They are fantastic. And again, if you go on our Knowledge Hub, you will see a fact sheet about those as well. And then we've got Tracy, talked about the balance between planning and doing. What are your top tips for managing expectations between just do it people and the analysis plan people? Can find ourselves chasing the football. I like that. G, do you want to start with that one?
So the planning for me is about setup rather than planning for the delivery of the change. So I think for me it's about resource alignment. I think those are the two things. I think a bit like our model, I think you can translate that into a department. You can probably even translate it down to a process. But if we're talking about as soon as we know what needs to change, we can start planning. And that's where we say, well, let's align the different things that need to happen into the right phases, into the right timescale, and let's make sure we've got the right resource on it. I think after you've done that and you start the doing, that's where we might adopt a model like Agile, for example, where we're doing much more of the experimentation or implementing, testing, making it the new way of doing things or doing something different. So for me, it's the stages at which point that you want to plan. I think, for me, implementation, the amount of time it takes you to plan, you could have just tried it and see, did it work, yes or no. There are other types of planning that don't often come across as planning, things like solution effect. It's more looking at the impact of something if we did this, and you could argue that that's some form of early planning, but that's the type of stuff that's important for me when you get into those implementation stages. If we do this, what would happen? Have we got a good handle on that? Is it okay to try, is what you're trying to answer, rather than a front end when you're really looking at what's the resource, who's going to be involved and those sorts of things. So I don't know if you've probably got a better answer than that, Rhiannon.
No, I was struggling to find the words. I'm very happy with that. Thank you, G. Hopefully Tracy is too. And another question from Leanne, pleased that there's a checkup on that the change is working, because her experience is that change gets implemented and the consultant leaves, and then within a few months the great change process revert back to the previous status quo. How do you prevent that happening? Really good question, and we do have some very specific answers. Measurement, absolutely. You have to, at the start of any project or transformation or change, the question is, how will you know if you've achieved what you want? And then you have to set up measurement to evidence that, and you have to make sure the teams themselves are measuring that change as you are making the change, and afterwards, to make sure things are continuously improving. And you set up the problem solving, so if things start to revert or things start to go wrong, they know what to do and how to solve those problems. I mean, that's one way. The other way is the work we do with leadership. A huge part of a leader's role is process confirmation. So, checking in to make sure things are being followed as planned. If you empower your staff to design processes and to design the best process they can and to improve those processes, you expect those staff to therefore follow their own processes. And process confirmation is about the leader going out and saying, this is what I expect to happen. Is this what's actually happening on the ground? And if it's not, if people don't follow processes, it's for one of two reasons. I don't accept the whole, they're just being a pain. It will be because either they don't know, or they found a better way. And both of those are an issue. You need to be able to upskill the people that don't know. Why didn't they know? And if they found a better way, that should have been standardized as the new practice. So that has to go in place. So those two activities are really critical. We find that measurement is often very lacking, and that's a really important thing to set up. And then that leadership process confirmation activity. Gian, add?
Yeah, I think with the measurement, there's two types, isn't there? There's the measurement of the change, and then there's measurement of the performance. And while the performance is ongoing, one should affect the other. So it's, I think people forget sometimes that the team that were part of the implementation activity also need to hear things like, oh, we've implemented, 30 of the things that we wanted to, and this has changed and that's changed. And the impact of that has been our performance has increased, in X, Y, and Z. So I think, but both types of measurement are important, but again, boils back to measurement. I think a more general answer is, I think, from our experience, people are quite good at implementation, with help or not, but eventually get things changed, as you say. They're even okay at making it kind of embed, in within a team setting particularly. The bit they find really hard is the sustaining bit, and that's because the sustaining element of any change is much broader than the change that you've made. So if let's say you're working on a recruitment process, you can deliver great change in that, and you can embed it within that team. But to sustain it, and to sustain that way of working, particularly, not the process necessarily, but the way of working, needs you to have other departments that you work with quite often to have made those changes and embedded those changes as well. And that's one of the issues with, someone asked earlier around small scale change. You can deliver it and it's great and you can see benefits. The problem is when you come up against other departments that you work with that aren't in the same way, don't work in the same way. So, Rhiannon and I talk about wholesale change in organizations and getting them to recruit the right people, make sure their training is more values based and principle based, and all those other things, that some people call culture, if you will. But it's making sure that you are building a way of embedding and sustaining those changes going forward as an organization. It's the key difference between organizations where a senior manager or even a chief executive will come in and they'll just change the way you do things, versus those organizations that bring in people, even at chief executive level, that will fit the way that they want to work. So, they found and they know the way they're working is the right way, and they bring in the right people. So it's a really good question, because it's the hardest bit to do, really, to sustain the change over a long period.
Yeah, and it's especially difficult when leaders change, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that means getting quick, engage them, show them, how effective it is working at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And that this is our approach. This is our way of doing it, basically.
Jolly good. So there are no more questions. If anybody does have any questions after today, I'm going to send the recording link out to you all and to the people that couldn't make the live session. Do feel free to drop us an email with any questions, and we're always happy to chat. Our generic email address is hello@edesse.com, but you can respond directly to my email as well. And we will send the recording link, the Knowledge Hub link, sign up to the newsletter link. But thank you ever so much for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day.
See you all.